Okay, so we are in video 2 from module 3.1. The first video from 3.1 was how to graph an absolute value function. This video is going to cover how to turn that absolute value function into a piecewise function. You covered piecewise functions in module 2, so we're just combining the two components together. All right, so example 1 here. We have just the parent function of the absolute value function. F of x is equal to the absolute value of x. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause the video and give you an opportunity to graph this image. You can either graph it from memory, if you can recall from the video, or you can use the XY chart that you see below the function. I'll pause the video now. Whenever you've got it graphed, hit continue, and we'll continue with the lesson. Okay, welcome back. I'm going to use the XY chart just for good practice. So I'm going to choose some X values. Remember, X values go left and right. So I'm going to choose -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, and 3. Remember, what we're doing here is we're taking this X value and plugging it into the X value of the function. So all we're really asking ourselves here is, what's the absolute value of -3? Well, that's +3. Same thing for -2. So it's going to be +2. 1, 0. This is still going to be +1, +2, +3. So let's graph these points. The first one, -3, 3. -2, 2. -1, 1. 0, 0. +1, 1. +2, 2. And +3, 3. Okay, and we see that V shape that we originally saw in the first video. All right, so here's my absolute value function. Now, a couple things that we're going to notice here. All right, first of all, we have an axis of symmetry. The axis of symmetry, if you remember, is this imaginary line that splits the image perfectly in half. Now that we have our axis of symmetry, what we're going to look at here is, how did we find that axis of symmetry? Well, one way to do that is either looking at the image, or we can set what's inside the absolute value bars equal to 0. So my axis of symmetry is at 0. We're going to use that to write our piecewise function. Our piecewise function, f of x, is equal to, so we're going to go with this in two different directions. Remember, there's two sides to the graph. We have everything equal to or greater than 0. So if x is greater than or equal to 0, and then we have everything that's less than 0 if x is less than 0. Okay, so now let's talk about what happens here with this function if x is greater than or equal to 0. All right, so if I plug in 0 here, absolute value of 0 is 0. Absolute value of +1 is 1. Absolute value of 5 is +5. So if x is greater than 0, I'll get exactly what's inside here. So we could say x. All right, if x is less than 0, say this is -1. Well, the absolute value of -1 is +1. The absolute value of -2 is +2. Absolute value of 3 is +3. So it's actually the opposite of what's inside here. So how do we notate the opposite in math? We multiply by a negative, or we make it negative. So -x if x is less than 0. It's the opposite of what's inside the absolute value bars. Okay, let's look at the next one. We have the function f of x is equal to x minus 1, or the absolute value of x minus 1, minus 2. I'm going to pause the video and give you an opportunity to graph this one as well. Okay, welcome back. All right, so once again, we're going to choose some different numbers here to kind of help us out. All right, so we're going to do -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. Now, I'll do the first one. So if I plug in -2 here, that's -2 minus 1. That's going to be the absolute value of -3. That's going to be 3 minus 2, which is 1. Okay. So now that we've got that up, what we're going to do is we're going to do that each time. We're going to plug in -1, then we'll plug in 0, then +1, +2. I'm going to go ahead and fill out my chart, which is going to be 0, -1, -2, -1. All right, so let's graph these. So -2 and up 1, -1 and 0, 0, -1, 1 and -2, and then 2 and -1. If we wanted to, we could go ahead and put this one here as well. Connect the dots. And we see that V shape of the absolute value function. All right, so let's talk about the axis of symmetry. Once again, if you look closely, you'll see that axis of symmetry here. That axis of symmetry is at +1. We could also find it by taking what's inside the absolute value bars, setting it equal to 0. So x is equal to 1. So that's my axis of symmetry. So we're going to use that to write our piecewise function. F of x is equal to, and so we have if x is greater than or equal to 1, if x is less than 1. Okay, so now let's talk about this. Let's look at each side of the graph here. Let's look at this right side. All right, if x is greater than or equal to 1. If x is greater than or equal to 1. All right, so what happens here? If I plug in 1, 1 minus 1 gives me 0. Comes out, 0 is fine. All right, same thing here. If it's 2 or 3 or whatever, 2 minus 1 is going to be 1. When it comes out, it's still going to be a +1. So it's going to be this same function. So what we're going to do is we're going to replace the absolute value bars with parentheses. Okay, now what about the left side, where x is less than 1? If I plug in a 0 here, 0 minus 1 is going to give me -1. It's going to have to change when it comes out. So once again, we got to do the opposite of what's inside here. The way we make it opposite is we put a negative in the front. All right, so here's your piecewise function. Now, we could clean this up a little bit or simplify it. So I'm going to bring that down here below. If we do the math here, that's just going to be x minus 3 if x is greater than or equal to 1. This one, if we distribute the negative through, we get -x plus 1 minus 2. That's going to give me -x minus 1 if x is less than 1. All right, so there is my simplified version of my piecewise function. I hope this helps.